Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. Today, my guest is one of my very, very dear friends. So this is one of those special opportunities for me. My friend, David Lavietes. We have known each other for more decades than I'd like to acknowledge, and literally went to both high school and college almost together. He's older than I am, so, you know.
Just a year.
And have remained friends over the years, and have had fascinating conversations about lots of things. David is also the parent of a complex kid. And so he understands our world personally, intimately, now complex young adult. And yeah, their family is in the middle, if you were sharing with me, of working on getting a service dog. So, you know, maybe that'll come up, maybe it won't. But I wanted to invite him to join me for a conversation because we had a fascinating conversation over Thanksgiving break about problem solving and decision making and the different ways that people problem solve. And he had this really interesting perspective on, we were specifically talking about different majors in college and different disciplines in the work environment. And what you were saying to me, David, is that those are just different vehicles. Every discipline is a different vehicle for problem solving. And I thought, given that we in this complex world are constantly looking at how do we help our kids navigate their brains to find the most effective way to problem solve, that this would be a super conversation. So welcome to the podcast. Why don't you tell everybody first just a little bit about what you've done professionally, because you don't actually work in this arena directly, and how you came to this understanding that you have.
Sure. I'm a marketer. I worked in ad agencies for most of my career. Most of that has been within healthcare, a lot of pharmaceutical marketing, health insurance, healthcare delivery kind of clients, things like that, but also a lot of financial services and packaged goods and technology and other. And my role within the agency was to uncover the insights into how people think and feel and act about whatever product category we were talking about in order for us to engage with them, whether we were trying to sell them a product or get them involved in a program or disease management program or whatever. And one of the...
Can I just slow that down really quickly? Because just
Sure.
that, your job, and this is a professional career, y'all, has been to pay attention to how people think, feel, and act, and to speak to them based on learning and understanding how they think, feel, and act. Does that capture it?
Exactly. Because the tendency for marketers, as well as just regular people and moms and dads, is always to think that the other person's emotion doesn't really matter. They're already thinking the way we're thinking, and I've got this great product, and of course people would want it because it's great. And the core of my discipline is to rather than start with the decision that the marketer wants the consumer to make, to turn it over and think, well, what does the consumer want? Why are they interested in this product? Do they know they have a problem? Do they want to solve that problem? And really try to understand what the lived experience of the consumer is so that we can talk to them and engage with them in an appropriate way.
So I'm going to interrupt one second. And the reason that I thought this would be such a valuable conversation is because what you've been doing in your entire professional career is exactly what we are trying to help parents learn to do, which is to shift the conversation from what do I want my kid to do to what's in it for them, what's going on with them, how are they thinking and feeling in order to inform how they act. So keep going.
Exactly.
I want to just keep making the linkages here.
Yeah, thank you. Talking about my daughter's service dog, who is a 7-month-old golden doodle, we just visited in Tennessee where she's being trained. But my daughter, who's always loved dogs, had talked about getting a service dog for a number of years. And the point at which I finally said, okay, yeah, we're going to go and do that for you, was when she turned to me one day and said, I want to get a service dog so that I can be more independent. And that was the point at which I went, okay, you're ready for a dog. Because it wasn't about just having a dog. It wasn't about having something to hug. It wasn't about, a possession. It was about advancing her own life. And, that was a really sort of seminal moment for me, because she had always said that she felt young for her age, that she didn't feel as old as she was chronologically. And
which is true, right? Which is true for most of the people listening. Our kids are developmentally in a different place than they tend to be chronologically, right?
Exactly. And she coupled that with saying that, she didn't really want to grow up. And when
common.
Yes.
Right.
And when we, I think, finally got her into the best environment for her where she is now, and got her working with a therapist who really gets her, she started making progress much more quickly because she really wanted to make the progress. And it was, when she went from I'm afraid of having to be independent to no, I want to be independent, meant that she saw the value of it. She saw the benefits, and that she was, developing the kinds of desires that you want to see any kid develop, where they want something for themselves for their own reasons, not because we tell them to.
And that if we can just articulate, it didn't happen when she was 8 or 10 or 12, right? This is something that to get to that point of really self-agency like that takes a certain amount of frontal lobe. And that's not fully cooked till our kids are into their 20s. It's still, they have to get past 16 before they even get to a point where they've got, I think 60%.
Right. And I always repeat what you said to me a number of years ago, that, we found that non-typical kids, their brains keep developing until they're 30. And with Madeline, my daughter, she has, after 21, made so much more progress that she made in the previous, 5 years, and just really rapidly making progress and reaching new milestones. That is just, it's so heartwarming for me as a parent to see her enjoying life more and finding new meaning. She started working and really loves being at work and loves making money and loves the responsibility that they're giving her at work. And it's wonderful to see her wanting to do it, not because we're telling her you need to do these things.
Right. So let's map this into a conversation about problem solving and decision making. Right. What was important for you to understand to enroll her in this way and to give her the space to get to this point instead of trying to force it before she was ready?
I think the main thing that I've learned from interviewing hundreds of consumers and patients over the years, and dozens of doctors and nurses and and other kinds of healthcare providers, is that when it comes to making change in any part of your life, you've got to have your own reason for wanting to do it. If you can't be told you've got diabetes, you need to eat this diet, you can't be told, you've got to lose X pounds or else, or you've got to quit smoking, or you've got to stop drinking, or, any of these other changes. Making change is something that you have to have your own reason for wanting that outcome. and just being told you have to do something, whether it's, you have to grow up, or you have to, stop being so impulsive, or you have to be, whatever it might be. If you don't yourself see the benefit of that and see the reason why you want to do that, the odds of successful behavior change are just astronomically low. I mean, this is one thing I've seen. I've worked in a number of addiction categories that I see over and over again in addiction, and not even everyone in the addiction world gets, is that just telling somebody, that a behavior is destructive, whether it's a sex addiction or gambling addiction or alcoholism, or whatever, nobody stops because other people think they should.
Or because it's good for me. Right? Like, we all know we're not supposed to smoke, but that doesn't stop people from smoking or starting smoking even.
Right. And, one of the story that I tell over and over again is I'm one of those people who took forever to quit smoking, because I would quit very easily. And then 6 months later, I'd think, gee, I don't want a cigarette. Maybe I'll have one. And, then 2 weeks later, I'd have another one. And, before you know it, I was smoking again. Yeah. And the thing that finally stopped me smoking is I realized I was sick to death of quitting smoking, because the hardest part for me was from the decision that I'm going to quit till the Friday when I'm going to have my last cigarette was just torture for me. And once I got to that Friday and put on the patch and everything, it was fine. But that week, leading up to it was so horrific emotionally. I thought, I never want to go through that again. And that's the thing that has kept me from ever wanting to do it again, because I know that I'm going to hate that.
Yeah, for me, it was the smell. I just couldn't live with the smell anymore. And somebody went to kiss my hand and went, ooh. And I thought, I don't ever want that again. And it was motivation enough. But it changed when I decided. And that's really what you're saying, is that first we set an intention, we make a decision, we have our own motivation before we then figure out how to make that change happen, or for that change to be effective.
Right. And the way that I've always worked professionally in order to help my clients sort of understand the disease state they're working with is that when I talk to patients, I'm not asking them what they know about what they should be doing. I'm asking them how they feel. I'm asking them, why they do things the way they do them. I'm asking them, how it affects them when they do things in certain ways, and, how they think about things. And, I think the same is true for any kid, neurotypical or not, when you're trying to help them make a decision, whether it's where to go to college, or, what to do for a living, or where they want to live, or, you can't impose your own frameworks. Well, I think you should live in a big city. You have to say to them and ask them, how do you want to be? What attracts you about this versus that? And really listen for the really personal things they tell you, and then follow through on them. One of the things that we talk about in research is the 5 whys. And the theory is that if you ask someone a question and ask them why they gave that answer, and keep asking them why they gave each answer, within 5 whys, you'll get down to the real reason.
Well, and it's really funny you say that, because one of the things I teach parents is not to ask the question why. Because very often with kids, because we're not asking why because we're curious, we're asking why because we're accusatory, right?
Exactly.
Why did you do that is just going to get a defense reaction. But when you ask it from a curious place, I think you get a different response.
Right. And it's not the why did you do that? It's the what about that do you like? What about that makes you feel good? Why does that feel good? I know you like that, but can you tell me what about it makes you feel good? Is it that when you do that, I'm noticing you? Or is it that, when you do that, it lets you release something? I mean, when my daughter has her anxiety, sometimes she needs to physically shake it out. And the first time she did that, I was like, oh my God, are you all right? And she was, at that point articulate enough to say, no, nothing's wrong. I just need to do this. It helps me let go of the anxiety. And it's, understanding things from the individual's point of view that really helps you get to the place where you can help them. And, going back to the thing about problem solving methodologies, one of the things that my son is a science student and is, very analytical and very scientifically oriented. And he approaches things, like a biology student would. He's looking for underlying hidden, operators and processes that are going on that he might not be aware of. Whereas, people who are trained as engineers, approach problems in other ways. And I think the thing that I discovered about myself only once I started working, and I didn't really realize this in college or as I was thinking about a career, is that the way that the problem-solving methodology that works best for me is starting with the people itself rather than the problem, and trying to understand where the thing I'm trying to solve fits into their lives and what their experience with it has been in the past and what their objectives are. And I've found that, using the lens of the individual really helps me tease apart a problem. That was probably really confusing.
I think it makes sense, but let's apply it for a minute, because part of the conversation, we were visiting with my son, who's taken a bunch of different art over the years. He's a studio art major. He's majoring in studio art and the history of ideas. And I was teasing him about it maybe not being so practical. And you actually took a different lens to it. And you said, well, he's done music, he's done theater, he's done studio art, he's done, and you started looking at all the things he's done and introduced this notion that what he's learned is a whole bunch of different ways to problem solve. And that it was a big light bulb for me. And I think when you bring it back, what you're saying is that when we look at how people, what's interesting to them, we're going to find different ways for problem solving. So speak to that a little bit, because you can say it better than I did.
So we were talking to your son about, work and what he might want to be doing. And, I've worked across so many different industries, and I've worked, within marketing organizations and on, company structure and operations, and solved all sorts of different problems for my client companies. And what I was, I think, trying to tell Josh was that the best problem solvers are the people who have a lot of different ways of solving a problem. That when someone, thinks that, the old saying, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that many people, when they are confronted by a problem, look for a solution without thinking about how to get to a solution. They just think, here's the problem. Do I know the answer?
What's the solution? What's the solution?
Right.
Exactly.
And if they know something, awesome, I got a solution. And if they don't, they don't really necessarily think about how to get to one.
Right.
And the key to really good problem solving, and the things that, we've done for years on the and ad agencies, is give clients lots of different tools and ways to approach the same problem. When I worked years ago for a guy named Bill Mulligan, who is one of my favorite bosses ever. And he said to me once, the thing I like about working with you is when I give you a problem, you say, okay, well, what about this solution? And if I say, no, I don't like that one, you say, okay, well, if we look at it from this perspective, what about this solution? And then you keep walking around the same problem from all different perspectives until we get something that works. And when you think about problem solving, again, whether it's, what your kid's going to do for a living or where they're going to live, there's more than one way to look at any problem. You can start at it from a perspective of, okay, if we're talking about where you want to live, We can talk about where could you be that is near other people that you would want to be near, or we could talk about it, or what are the places that have the kind of weather that you'd like to be in, or what are the places that have the kinds of industries that you want to work in. And so even for as simple a problem as, where do I want to live? To which most of us will go, gee, I don't know. There are lots of lenses you can put on it that'll start helping you get to the problem, but you've got to be able to think horizontally to what are the different criteria by which I might make this decision.
Mm-hmm. I love
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And one of the things that you talked about that I think is so interesting is this notion that different disciplines introduce different ways to solve problems. In our world, the coach approach is about a process for problem solving, because I'm not trying to give anybody the solution. I'm trying to give you a process that you can go through to do exactly what you're saying, which is look at any given problem from different areas, different perspectives, and learn how to problem solve. And what you were saying was that when you look at what kids are taking in school, particularly at the university level, every discipline is a different way of problem solving. So if you look at it from a history perspective, you're going to have a different way of problem solving than if you look at it from a chemistry perspective or an anthropology perspective, or, et cetera, or from the arts. And that's, I think, a new way to think about helping our kids find their interests and their strengths.
Right. And it's also a question of, do you fundamentally believe that every problem only has one best answer?
Right.
And which is something that, we as parents tend to do because we want our kids to have the same life that we had. And so you are oriented towards how do I get them to the same solution I would have made at this point, or I made back then. And I think one of the most important things I've learned about problem solving over the years is that if you just try to get to a solution and then decide whether it's right or not, you tend to get stuck on the first thing you come up with. Whereas if you focus instead on generating a lot of answers, and then weed them out and find out which ones fit best, then it's a lot easier to think creatively, because you're not getting locked into there's only one way to answer this question.
Right. Well, and I think, and we need to start wrapping up this conversation, but I think what that triggers for me is so often parents get frustrated because they ask their kids a question and the kid says, I don't know. And then the parent gets frustrated because they hit the I don't know. And I always say, I don't know is an opportunity. But part of what's probably happening is that if your kid thinks that you're expecting a single answer to that question, if you're asking a question that they think you want them to have the answer, that's part of where the idea, I don't know, comes from.
Exactly. And it really empowers people when you help them think.
Yes.
And rather than giving them the idea, you say, well, what if we look at it this way? If you're thinking about what you want to do, we could think about, it in terms of what kind of schedule do you want? There's some things that are 9 to 5 and that's it. And there are other things that, are 24 hours a day. How do you like to work? What would be more important to you? And you don't necessarily have to be, have tons of experience out in the world to start thinking about things like this. So, I think my main thought is when it comes to parenting is that I don't want to just ask them a question and see what they think. I want to help them explore how they might think about it and help them with my greater experience, think of different ways to think about the subject so that they can get to the solution that's right for them, because they might get stuck on the first thing they think of as well.
I love that. So we need to wrap this conversation up. I'm sad, but I loved it. And I'm really, really grateful to bring this, because I really, really just want to invite people to think about problem solving from a different perspective. And so this was a great way to do that. Any resources you want to direct people to that you think might be helpful for them? Other than an impact.
Other than my friend Elaine.
Yeah.
There's a great book that I love called Stumbling on Happiness
I love
that is by Dan. I'm blanking his last name. He's a psychology professor at Harvard.
I don't know, but I can tell you it's already in our reading carousel. So we will put the link in the chat.
That's an amazing book. If you read Blink, this deals with a lot of the original studies that Blink just talked a little bit about, and it goes much more deeply into how emotion drives decision-making and how the various parts of the brain work. And it's a great, really easy to read sort of primer on how we don't really think the way we think we do.
Right. Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right. So that is a great book for.
And again, we'll put all of these in the reading carousel to make it easy for y'all and give you the links.
Yeah. It's a great book for understanding why people think in the complicated ways they do and how it helps understand how other people are thinking.
I love that. Thank you. All right. So as we wrap this up, anything else you want to make sure that our listeners get from today, or wrap up, or something you want to add?
I think the biggest thing that, I learned from my career of interviewing people is you have to listen well. Mm-hmm. And when you hear someone say something that you didn't expect, you don't ignore it, you follow it up and say, really, how come? Why? Mm-hmm. What makes you feel that way? Because that's where the important stuff is. I've never done a research study where the most important thing we found was something we didn't even know to look for. Because when you think you understand the whole topic, you don't. There's always something going on that you don't know. And it's listening, especially with your kids, listening for those reactions that are different than yours and exploring them and saying, help me understand why you feel that way. Or, what do you mean by that? Because those are the places where you learn something about your kid that you didn't even know you were missing.
Well, and, in our lens, what I would say is that's the difference between interrogation and curiosity. Mm. What you're saying is get really genuinely, authentically curious rather than drilling them for information.
Right.
Big difference.
Yeah, right? Very big difference.
So, I mentioned to you that I would ask you this. Do you have a favorite quote or motto that's coming up that you think might be relevant to today's conversation?
Oh boy, something's on the tip of my tongue. And I'm sure it's probably either a quote from Mark Twain or Churchill, one of the two, because all of the good ones seem to be. No, I'm blanking it. If I think of it, I'll email you.
Okay. And we'll put it in the show notes when you do.
Yeah.
Okay. Super. All right, my friend. Thank you for being here, for the fascinating work you've done in the world. One of the jobs you took, I remember a number of years ago, you called me and you said, I'm going to fix healthcare. And I thought, what a great thing to want to do. And while there may still be a little bit of room left for improvement, to take the work that you do and apply it in ways that matter for people's lives is really powerful. So I really honor you for that.
Thank you. It was great talking to you.
You as well, and always. And to those of you tuning in, thank you for what you're doing for yourselves and for your kids. It makes a huge difference. Take care, everybody. See you on the next one.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/Sanity School.